Elena Marsh ran through the dark field with her heart pounding against her ribs, the cold night air burning her lungs as she pushed her legs faster than they had ever moved before. Behind her, the sound of horses grew louder, hooves striking the earth like drumbeats of doom. She was not running from bandits or wolves in the wild sense. She was running toward the one decision that could save everyone she loved, and every step felt like it might be her last as a free woman. 3 days earlier, the elders of Hollow Creek had gathered in the old stone hall, their faces pale with worry. The crops had failed again, the wells had turned bitter, and the treaty that once protected their small village from the dangers beyond the forest had expired, leaving them open to raiders, sickness, and worse. The village needed a miracle, and miracles in this part of the world came with a price. Harold, the eldest of the council, had stood before the frightened crowd and explained what needed to happen. The Alpha King, ruler of the territory beyond the northern ridge, had once protected Hollow Creek under an old agreement made by their grandparents. That agreement required a bride, a woman from the village who would marry into the ruling pack and seal the bond between wolf and human. Without a bride, the protection would end completely, and Hollow Creek would be left defenseless against the dangers that prowled the borders. Elena had listened to every word with her stomach twisting into knots. She had grown up hearing stories about the Alpha King, tales meant to frighten children into obedience. Some said he was a monster with claws like knives. Others said he had eyes that could freeze a man's blood. No one had ever seen his face and lived to describe it clearly, or so the stories went. Elena had always assumed these were just legends, exaggerations passed down through generations of frightened villagers. But when her younger sister Lily's name was mentioned as a possible candidate, something inside Elena snapped into focus. Lily was only 17, gentle and soft-spoken, the kind of girl who cried when she saw injured birds and spent her evenings sketching flowers by candlelight. Elena could not imagine her sister facing whatever waited beyond the ridge. She could not let that happen. So Elena stood up in front of the entire council and volunteered herself instead. The room fell silent. Her father, Edmund Marsh, the village blacksmith, tried to argue against it, his weathered hands shaking as he pleaded with the elders to find another way. But there was no other way. The treaty demanded a bride within the week, or the protection would be gone forever, and Edmund knew his daughter's mind was already made up. Elena spent her final days at home preparing herself, though there was little she could actually do to prepare for marrying a stranger she had never seen. She helped her mother in the kitchen, taught Lily a few new stitches for her needlework, and walked the familiar paths of the village one last time, memorizing every detail, as if she might never return. The apple orchard near the eastern fence, the small stream where the children played in summer, the bakery that always smelled of warm bread in the early morning. On the night before she was set to leave, Elena sat with her father by the fire. He told her stories about her mother when she was young, about the early days of Hollow Creek before Elena was born, about hardships the village had overcome before. He was trying to give her courage, though his voice cracked more than once. Elena held his hand and promised him she would be strong, even though inside, she felt like a small child staring into an endless dark forest. The morning of her departure arrived too quickly. A group of riders came from the Northern Territory to escort her, their expressions unreadable, their movements too precise and too controlled to belong to ordinary men. Elena noticed the way they seemed to sense things before they happened, the way their eyes flickered gold in certain light. She tried not to stare, but fear made it difficult to look away. The journey to the fortress took 2 full days, winding through forests that grew thicker and darker the further north they traveled. Elena rode in a covered wagon most of the way, watching the landscape change through a small gap in the canvas. The trees here were ancient, their trunks wide enough that 3 men could not wrap their arms around them. The air smelled different too, sharper somehow, carrying scents she could not identify. When the fortress finally came into view, Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. It rose from the mountainside like something carved by giants, dark stone walls stretching upward into the clouds, towers capped with black slate roofs that gleamed even under the gray sky. This was nothing like the wooden buildings of Hollow Creek. This was a place built to inspire fear and command respect, and it succeeded completely. She was led through massive gates into a courtyard filled with people, though calling them ordinary people felt wrong somehow. They moved with an unnatural grace, their conversations pausing as she passed, their eyes following her with open curiosity, and something else Elena could not name. She kept her chin up and her shoulders straight, refusing to let them see how frightened she truly was. A woman named Nora, who introduced herself as one of the fortress attendants, guided Elena to a chamber, where she was bathed and dressed in a gown finer than anything she had ever worn. The fabric felt like water against her skin, dyed a deep shade of blue that matched nothing found in Hollow Creek's simple dye pots. Elena stared at her reflection in a polished mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at her. The ceremony itself happened faster than Elena expected, almost rushed, as if the pack wanted the formality completed before anyone could question it further. She was led into a great hall lined with stone pillars and torches that cast flickering shadows across the walls. A crowd had gathered, silent and watchful, and at the front of the hall stood a man wearing a dark mask that covered the upper half of his face. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in clothing that spoke of wealth and power without excess decoration. His jaw was strong, his posture commanding even in stillness. Elena could not see his eyes clearly beneath the mask, but she felt them studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He did not speak during the ceremony beyond the required vows, his voice low and steady, giving nothing away. The words exchanged between them felt hollow, formal phrases recited without warmth, promises made to satisfy tradition rather than genuine feeling. Elena repeated her lines with a steady voice, refusing to let her fear show in front of the crowd. When it was finished, a ring made of dark metal was placed on her finger, cool against her skin, and just like that, she was married to a man whose name she did not even know. That night, Elena was brought to a chamber high in one of the fortress towers, a room larger than her entire family home, furnished with heavy wooden furniture and thick tapestries, depicting wolves running through moonlit forests. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed, waiting, uncertain what was expected of her, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. The masked man entered the room quietly, closing the door behind him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Elena studied him from across the room, trying to read something in his posture, some hint of what kind of life she had just committed herself to. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice softer than she expected, carrying none of the harshness she had braced herself for. He told her that she was safe within these walls, that no harm would come to her as long as she followed the customs of the pack and did not attempt to leave the fortress grounds without permission. He explained that their marriage was a matter of necessity, a political arrangement meant to secure peace between their two peoples, and that he did not expect anything from her beyond her presence and her cooperation. Elena asked him his name, and he hesitated before answering. He told her to call him Kale, nothing more, no titles, no explanations about who he truly was within this fortress. When she asked why he wore the mask, he simply said that some things were better left unseen for now, and that she would understand in time. Then, without another word, he turned and left the room, leaving Elena alone with her racing thoughts. She did not sleep well that first night. Every sound outside her window, every distant howl carried on the wind, sent a fresh wave of nervousness through her body. She thought about her family back in Hollow Creek, wondering if they were safe, wondering if the treaty had truly been restored, wondering if she had made the right choice in offering herself, instead of allowing her sister to face this unknown fate. By morning, exhaustion finally overtook her fear, and she drifted into a restless sleep, filled with strange dreams, of golden eyes, watching her from the shadows. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the tall windows of her new chamber, and for a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality settled back over her like a heavy blanket, and she remembered everything that had changed in such a short span of time. Nora arrived shortly after, with a tray of food and fresh clothing, explaining that Elena would be given a tour of the fortress grounds that day, along with an introduction to some of the customs and expectations she would need to understand, as the wife of a member of the ruling pack. Elena asked Nora directly who her husband truly was, what position he held within the fortress, but Nora only offered a nervous smile and changed the subject, saying it was not her place to explain such things. As the day progressed, Elena began noticing small details that unsettled her further. Guards straightened their posture whenever she walked past certain hallways. Servants lowered their eyes and stepped aside quickly whenever she approached particular rooms. There was a reverence in the way people spoke about the man she had married, a careful respect that went beyond what she would expect for an ordinary member of the pack. even a wealthy or influential one. She tried asking questions during her tour, casual inquiries about her husband's role, his history, his family within the fortress. Every person she asked deflected in similar ways, offering vague answers, or quickly changing topics, as if there was an unspoken rule preventing them from discussing such things openly with her. Elena's curiosity grew stronger with each dismissal, and so did her determination to uncover the truth for herself. That evening, as the sun began setting behind the mountains, casting long orange shadows across the fortress courtyard, Elena stood at her chamber window and looked out over the vast territory that was now somehow her home. Somewhere out there, beyond the walls, Hollow Creek was hopefully safe, its fields hopefully beginning to recover, its people hopefully sleeping soundly for the first time in weeks. She thought about the masked man who had spoken to her with such quiet gentleness the night before, so different from the monster the stories had described. There was something about him that did not fit the frightening tales she had grown up hearing, something that made her wonder if perhaps she had misunderstood everything about this place and the man she had married. Elena did not know it yet, but the truth waiting for her within these fortress walls was far more complicated and far more important than she could have imagined. Her decision to save her sister had led her into a world of secrets, power, and danger that stretched far beyond the simple village life she had left behind. And somewhere in that world, hidden behind a dark mask, waited answers that would change everything she thought she understood about her new husband, her marriage, and the fate of everyone she loved. As night fell completely over the fortress, Elena finally allowed herself to close her eyes, exhaustion pulling her toward sleep once more. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new discoveries, and the first steps toward uncovering a truth that the entire pack seemed determined to keep hidden from her. For now, she rested, gathering whatever strength she could find for the journey that lay ahead, a journey she was only beginning to understand had barely started at all. The days that followed settled into a strange new rhythm for Elena, one built around unfamiliar customs and constant careful observation. She rose early each morning, dressed in the fine clothing provided to her, and spent her hours exploring what parts of the fortress she was permitted to see. Nora remained her closest companion during this time, though the young attendant still refused to answer many of Elena's questions directly. It was during her third week at the fortress that Elena met Mira, a healer who worked in the small infirmary near the eastern wing. Unlike many of the other pack members, Mira did not treat Elena with the same wary distance. Instead, she greeted her warmly, offering a genuine smile that felt like the first true kindness Elena had experienced since arriving. The two women quickly formed a bond, meeting often in the quiet hours of the afternoon, to talk while Mira prepared her herbal remedies. Mira explained some of the basic structure of pack life to Elena, things the other servants had been too nervous to share. She described how the fortress operated almost like a small kingdom, with different families holding different responsibilities, some overseeing hunting parties, others managing trade with neighboring territories, and still others responsible for defense and training the younger wolves. It was a complex system, far more organized than Elena had ever imagined a group of wolves could maintain. When Elena asked about her husband directly, Mira's expression grew careful, much like everyone else's had. She told Elena that some truths were not hers to reveal, that Cale himself would need to be the one to explain his position when he felt the time was right. But she did offer one piece of insight that stayed with Elena for days afterward. She said that the burdens carried by certain members of the pack were heavier than most people could understand, and that patience would serve Elena well in the time ahead. Elena's curiosity only intensified after that conversation. She began paying closer attention to everything around her, noticing patterns she had missed before, the way certain wolves lowered their heads slightly when Cale's name was mentioned, the way the fortress guards changed their formation whenever he moved through the halls, always positioning themselves as though protecting something precious. The way even the oldest members of the pack, wolves who had clearly lived through decades of hardship and battle, seemed to defer to him without question. One afternoon, while walking near the training grounds located at the base of the eastern tower, Elena witnessed something that would change how she viewed her husband entirely. She had wandered further than usual, drawn by the sound of clashing weapons and shouted commands, and found herself standing at the edge of a large open yard, where young wolves practiced combat under the watchful eyes of instructors. At the center of the yard stood Cale, no longer wearing his mask, engaged in a sparring match against 3 opponents at once. Elena froze at the sight of him, unable to look away. His movements were impossibly fast, almost too quick for her eyes to properly follow, each strike calculated and precise. His opponents, skilled fighters themselves, struggled to land even a single blow against him, and within moments, all 3 had been disarmed and forced to the ground. The crowd of onlookers erupted into respectful applause, though there was something reverent in their reaction rather than simple entertainment. Cale straightened, breathing steadily despite the intensity of the match, and it was then that his eyes found Elena standing at the edge of the yard. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and Elena saw something flash across his features, an expression she could not quite decipher, somewhere between surprise and something deeper. He approached her afterward, still without his mask, and for the first time, Elena could see his full face clearly in the daylight. His features were striking, sharp and refined, with eyes the color of amber that seemed to hold ancient knowledge behind them. There was a scar running along his jawline, a mark from some past battle, and it only added to the sense that this man had lived a life far beyond anything Elena could fully comprehend. She asked him directly what she had just witnessed, why the other wolves treated him with such obvious deference, why he could move with such incredible speed and strength compared to everyone else in the yard. Cale's expression grew guarded, and for a moment, Elena thought he might simply walk away without answering, as everyone else had done before him. Instead, he told her that not everything could be explained in a single conversation, that certain truths required time and trust before they could be properly shared. He asked her to be patient a little longer, promising that he would eventually tell her everything she wanted to know. Elena, frustrated but sensing that pushing further would accomplish nothing, agreed to wait, though her determination to understand the truth had only grown stronger. Over the following days, Elena began piecing together fragments of information from various sources around the fortress. She listened carefully to conversations between guards when they thought she was not paying attention. She noticed the way certain rooms in the fortress were kept locked, accessible only to a select few. She observed the elaborate ceremonies that took place during the full moon, where the entire pack gathered in the central courtyard for reasons no one would fully explain to her. During one such ceremony, Elena watched from her tower window as hundreds of wolves gathered below, forming careful rows and waiting in complete silence. When Cale appeared on a raised platform at the front of the gathering, the entire crowd dropped to one knee simultaneously, a gesture of respect so absolute and so perfectly coordinated that it sent a shiver down Elena's spine. This was not the behavior of a pack toward an ordinary member, no matter how skilled or respected he might be. Elena realized in that moment that whatever position her husband held within this fortress, it was far greater than she had originally assumed. She began searching for more concrete answers, spending time in the fortress library when she was permitted access, reading through old records and historical accounts that mentioned the ruling structure of the Northern Territories. Much of what she found was written in an old dialect she struggled to fully understand, but certain phrases stood out to her clearly. References to bloodlines, mentions of ancient pacts made between the first wolves and the spirits of the mountain, descriptions of a lineage that had ruled this territory for generations beyond counting, passed down through a single family whose authority was considered absolute among all the packs in the region. Elena began to suspect that her husband was not simply a respected warrior or a wealthy landholder within the pack structure. She brought her suspicions to Mira during their next meeting, laying out everything she had observed and everything she had read. Mira listened quietly, her expression growing increasingly solemn as Elena spoke. When Elena finally asked directly whether her husband was the leader of this entire territory, the true ruler that all the other packs answered to, Mira hesitated for a long moment before finally nodding slowly. She explained that it was not her place to reveal such things, that this was information Cale needed to share himself, but she could no longer pretend that Elena's assumptions were wrong. She confirmed that Cale held the highest position within the entire Northern Territory, a title passed down through his family for countless generations, one that carried responsibilities and dangers that few outside the pack could ever truly understand. Elena sat in stunned silence as the full weight of this revelation settled over her. She had married not just a stranger, but the single most powerful figure in this entire region, a man whose decisions affected the lives of countless wolves and humans across territories far beyond what she had ever imagined. The masked stranger who had spoken to her so gently on their wedding night was, in truth, the ruler that every other wolf in this land answered to without question. That night, Elena confronted Cale directly in her chamber, demanding to know why he had kept something so significant hidden from her. Why had he allowed her to wander through the fortress without understanding the true nature of her situation? Why had he let her discover the truth through fragments and rumors, rather than simply telling her himself from the beginning? Cale listened to her frustration without interrupting, and when she finally finished, he sat down across from her, his expression heavy with something that looked like genuine regret. He began to explain his reasoning, though Elena could tell he was choosing his words carefully, still holding back certain details, even as he opened up about others. He told her that his position came with enemies, dangers that extended far beyond the fortress walls, and that revealing everything too quickly could put her in greater danger than she already faced. He also admitted, somewhat reluctantly, that he had wanted to see how she would react to him as simply a person, before she knew about his title and power. Too many people in his life had only ever seen the position he held, rather than who he truly was underneath it. He wanted to know if Elena's kindness and courage were genuine, not influenced by the knowledge of what marrying the most powerful figure in the territory might mean for her. Elena felt a complicated mixture of anger and understanding wash over her as she listened to his explanation. She could see the loneliness behind his reasoning, the weight of a lifetime spent wondering whether people around him valued him for himself or simply for his authority. But she also could not fully forgive the deception, the weeks of confusion and fear she had experienced, while trying to piece together a truth that he could have simply told her from the very beginning. She told him plainly that she needed honesty from him going forward, that she could not continue living in this fortress, surrounded by secrets and half-truths. Cale nodded slowly, seeming to understand the fairness of her request, and promised that he would be more open with her from that point forward, though he warned that some matters remained too dangerous to discuss even now. As their conversation continued late into the night, Elena found herself seeing him differently, no longer simply as the mysterious stranger she had married out of necessity, but as a man carrying immense responsibility and isolation that she was only beginning to understand. There was a tiredness behind his eyes that spoke of years spent making difficult decisions alone, of trust given carefully and rarely, of a life lived constantly under the watchful judgment of an entire territory, depending on his strength. Before she finally drifted off to sleep that night, Elena realized that her situation had become far more complicated than a simple arrangement to save her village. She had married the most powerful wolf in the northern territories, a man hiding behind both a literal mask and years of careful emotional distance, and she was only now beginning to understand just how deep the secrets surrounding this fortress truly ran. Whatever came next, she knew her life would never return to the simple existence she had known back in Hollow Creek, and for reasons she could not fully explain even to herself, she found that she was not entirely sorry for that change. A full moon gathering had been announced for the following week, and Nora explained to Elena that this particular ceremony would be different from the smaller rituals she had witnessed before. This one required the presence of every pack member within the territory, along with representatives from neighboring packs who traveled great distances to attend. It was, Nora explained carefully, a formal occasion where matters of leadership and alliance were often addressed publicly. Elena spent the days leading up to the gathering feeling increasingly nervous, though she could not fully explain why. Cale had grown somewhat more open with her since their conversation, sharing small details about pack customs and answering her questions more directly, though he still maintained a careful distance around certain topics. She sensed that something significant was coming, something that would require her to fully understand and accept the reality of the life she had married into. On the morning of the gathering, Nora arrived early to help Elena prepare, dressing her in a formal gown of deep silver that seemed to catch and reflect the light with every movement. The attendant explained that as the wife of the Alpha King, Elena would be expected to stand beside Cale during the ceremony, presented formally to the assembled packs for the first time since their wedding. Elena's stomach tightened at the thought of facing so many strangers, wolves from territories she had never even heard of before arriving at this fortress. The ceremony began as the sun began to set, the sky painted in shades of deep orange and purple that gradually faded into darkness. Elena stood beside Cale on the same raised platform where she had once watched him address the pack from a distance. Now, standing so close to him, She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. Wolves from Kale's own territory, alongside visitors from packs she did not recognize, all gathered in the courtyard below. Kale began speaking to the assembled crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard, without any need for amplification. He spoke about the renewed treaty with Hollow Creek, about the importance of maintaining peace and cooperation between human villages and wolf territories, about the responsibilities that came with power, and the dangers of allowing old conflicts to reignite. Elena listened, impressed by the confidence and wisdom in his words, understanding for the first time the true scope of leadership he carried. As his speech continued, Elena noticed movement near the edge of the courtyard, a group of unfamiliar wolves standing slightly apart from the others, their expressions cold and calculating rather than respectful. Nora, standing nearby, leaned close and whispered that these visitors came from a rival territory to the west, led by an alpha named Draven, whose relationship with Kale's pack had grown increasingly tense over recent months. Elena watched Draven carefully throughout the remainder of the ceremony. He was tall like Kale, though his features carried a harder edge, his eyes narrow and calculating as he observed the proceedings. When Kale formally introduced Elena to the assembled crowd as his wife, Draven's expression shifted into something that looked almost like amusement, a private smile that made Elena's skin prickle with unease. After the formal portion of the ceremony concluded, the gathering transitioned into a more relaxed celebration, with food and drink being shared among the different packs as a symbol of continued peace. Elena found herself standing near Kale as various pack leaders approached to offer their respects, each conversation revealing small details about the complex political relationships that existed between the different territories. It was during this time that Draven finally approached them directly, his movements smooth and confident, carrying himself with the same commanding presence that Kale possessed, though something about his energy felt fundamentally different, colder somehow. He offered congratulations on the marriage, his words polite on the surface but carrying an undertone that made Elena instinctively wary. Draven asked pointed questions about Hollow Creek, about the specific terms of the renewed treaty, about the resources and land involved in the agreement. Kale answered carefully, his tone remaining diplomatic, even as Elena sensed a subtle tension building between the two men. When Draven finally excused himself to rejoin his own pack members, Elena turned to Kale and asked what exactly was happening between him and this rival alpha. Kale explained, his voice lowered so only Elena could hear, that Draven's territory had been experiencing difficulties of its own, poor harvests and dwindling resources that had led to growing resentment among his pack members. There were rumors, he explained, that Draven had begun looking toward expanding his territory, potentially through conflict with neighboring packs, including Kale's own lands and the human villages under his protection, Hollow Creek among them. This revelation sent a chill through Elena as she considered the implications. Had the blight that struck her village's crops truly been a natural occurrence, or could it have been connected somehow to the growing tensions between these two powerful alphas? She voiced this suspicion to Kale, watching his expression grow serious as he considered her words carefully. He admitted that he had begun suspecting something similar himself, though he had not wanted to alarm Elena with unconfirmed theories before he had gathered more concrete evidence. He explained that unusual events had been occurring across several territories recently: failed crops, poisoned water sources, strange illnesses affecting livestock, all concentrated in areas that bordered his own lands and those of his allies. It was possible, he suggested, that these were not simply unfortunate coincidences, but deliberate acts meant to weaken his position and create opportunities for Draven's territory to expand. Elena felt a surge of protective anger at the thought that her village's suffering might have been orchestrated deliberately rather than caused by natural misfortune. She asked Kale what could be done to investigate these suspicions further, to protect Hollow Creek and the other affected territories from whatever scheme might be unfolding around them. Kale's expression grew thoughtful, and for the first time since their marriage, he looked at her not simply as someone to protect, but as a potential partner in addressing the dangers ahead. He explained that gathering solid evidence would require careful investigation, trusted allies who could move through different territories without raising suspicion, and someone who understood the specific circumstances in Hollow Creek well enough to identify what might be out of place. Elena, understanding what he was implying, offered her assistance immediately, eager to help uncover the truth behind whatever threatened both her new home and her original one. Cale hesitated before agreeing, clearly weighing the potential dangers of involving her directly in such a sensitive investigation. But he also recognized the value of her unique position, someone trusted by both the human village and increasingly by the wolf pack, someone who could move between both worlds in ways that few others in his territory could manage. Finally, he agreed that she could assist with certain aspects of the investigation, though he insisted on maintaining strict precautions for her safety. The celebration continued late into the night, but Elena found her thoughts increasingly consumed by this new purpose, this opportunity to actively contribute to protecting the people and places she cared about, rather than simply existing as a passive figure within the fortress walls. She watched the other pack members mingling and celebrating, noting which groups seemed particularly close to Cale's leadership and which maintained a more distant, watchful presence, filing away every observation that might prove useful later. As the gathering finally began winding down, with visiting packs preparing to return to their own territories before the night grew too late, Elena caught sight of Draven one final time, standing near the courtyard gates with several of his own pack members. He was watching her and Cale, with an expression that had lost its earlier polite mask, revealing something colder and more calculating underneath. When he noticed Elena watching him in return, he offered a slight nod, almost mocking in its formality, before turning to depart with his group. That night, as Elena and Cale retired to their chambers, she found herself reflecting on how dramatically her understanding of this world had shifted over the past several weeks. She had arrived at this fortress expecting to face a monster, only to discover a complex political landscape filled with alliances, rivalries, and dangers that extended far beyond anything she could have imagined back in the simple village life of Hollow Creek. Her marriage, once viewed as a sacrifice made purely out of necessity, had become something else entirely, a partnership that might hold the key to protecting everyone she cared about, from a threat neither she nor Cale fully understood yet. Cale, sensing her contemplative mood, asked what she was thinking about as they prepared for sleep. Elena admitted her fears about Draven, about the possibility that her village had been deliberately targeted, about the responsibility she now felt to help uncover the truth before more harm could be done. Cale listened patiently, and when she finished speaking, he offered words of reassurance that surprised her with their sincerity. He told her that her courage in volunteering to save her sister, and now in offering to help investigate these dangerous circumstances, spoke to a strength of character that he had rarely encountered, even among the most experienced warriors within his own pack. He admitted that he had initially married her, purely out of political necessity, expecting little more than a formal arrangement between them, but that her willingness to engage with the complexities of this new life, rather than simply enduring it passively, had earned a respect from him that he had not anticipated feeling so quickly. Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, an unexpected softening in her feelings toward this man who had once seemed so distant and mysterious behind his mask. She realized that despite the fear and uncertainty that had marked her arrival at this fortress, something genuine was beginning to grow between them, a connection built not on the forced circumstances of their marriage, but on mutual respect and a shared determination to protect the people and places that mattered most to both of them. As she finally drifted toward sleep that night, Elena's mind turned toward the investigation ahead, toward the mystery of the failing crops and the growing tension with Draven's territory. She did not yet know what dangers waited for her in the days to come, but for the first time since arriving at the fortress, she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond simple survival. She was no longer just a bride sent to fulfill an old treaty. She was becoming an active participant in protecting the future of everyone she cared about, standing beside a husband who was beginning to see her not just as a political necessity, but as a true partner in the challenges that lay ahead. The investigation began quietly, with Cale assigning a small group of trusted scouts to monitor the border regions between his territory and Draven's lands. Elena, eager to contribute in a meaningful way, offered to travel back to Hollow Creek under the guise of visiting her family, using the opportunity to examine the affected farmland more closely and speak with the villagers about anything unusual they might have noticed before the blight struck. Cale agreed to the plan, though he insisted on sending Finn, one of his most trusted guards, to accompany her for protection. Finn was a quiet, watchful man, with sharp eyes and an easy manner that put Elena at ease during their journey back toward her home village. As they traveled, he shared stories about his years serving within Cale's pack, offering Elena small glimpses into the man she had married, details that helped her understand him more fully. Finn explained that Cale had taken on leadership of the territory at a remarkably young age, following the sudden death of his father, in circumstances that remained somewhat mysterious, even among the pack's inner circle. The transition had been difficult, with several older pack members initially questioning whether such a young alpha could maintain control over the vast territory and its many responsibilities. Cale had spent years proving himself, Finn explained, earning respect through his fairness, his strategic thinking, and his willingness to fight alongside his pack, rather than simply commanding from a distance. Elena listened intently, piecing together a fuller picture of her husband's history and the pressures that had shaped him into the careful, sometimes guarded man she had come to know. She began to understand why he had been so hesitant to reveal his true identity to her at first, why he had wanted to know if she valued him beyond his title and power, given how many people throughout his life had likely approached him only with their own interests in mind. When they finally arrived at Hollow Creek, Elena felt an overwhelming rush of emotion at seeing her family and childhood home again. Her father embraced her tightly, tears in his eyes, as he expressed his relief at seeing her safe and well. Lily, now looking slightly older in the weeks since Elena had left, hugged her sister fiercely, asking countless questions about life at the fortress and whether Elena was truly being treated well by her new husband. Elena spent her first day back simply reconnecting with her family, sharing carefully edited versions of her experiences that omitted the more dangerous political concerns weighing on her mind. She did not want to worry her parents with theories about deliberate sabotage until she had gathered more concrete evidence to support her suspicions. Instead, she focused on reassuring them of her safety and happiness, noting with quiet relief that the village's crops had indeed begun recovering since the renewed treaty took effect. On her second day back, Elena began her investigation in earnest, walking through the fields that had suffered the worst of the blight, alongside Finn, who observed everything with a trained eye that Elena herself lacked. They examined the soil in several locations, noting unusual discoloration patterns that did not match typical descriptions of natural blight or disease that Elena had heard about from older farmers in the village. Finn pointed out subtle signs that suggested the contamination had originated from a specific source, rather than spreading naturally across the fields, patterns of discoloration that radiated outward from certain points near the eastern boundary of the village, close to the border that separated Hollow Creek from the surrounding wilderness. This boundary, Elena realized with growing unease, was closer to territory that had once been contested between different wolf packs before Cale's family had established firm control over the region generations ago. They spoke with several of the older farmers who had witnessed the blight firsthand, gathering accounts of unusual occurrences in the weeks before the crops began failing. One farmer, a weathered man named Callum, who had worked the eastern fields for over 30 years, described seeing strange lights moving through the forest at night shortly before the blight appeared, lights that moved with purpose rather than the random flickering of natural phenomena like fireflies or reflected moonlight. Another villager mentioned finding strange markings carved into several trees along the eastern boundary, symbols that none of the locals recognized, which had since been removed or worn away by weather, but which several witnesses described consistently enough that Elena felt confident they represented something more than mere coincidence or imagination. Finn's expression grew grim as he listened to these descriptions, and Elena could tell that whatever these symbols represented, he recognized them as significant. He explained to Elena, once they were away from the other villagers, that the markings described sounded similar to territorial claiming symbols used by certain wolf packs, markers meant to establish boundaries or signal intentions to other packs in the region. If Draven's territory had indeed been responsible for the blight, these markings might represent an attempt to claim influence over Hollow Creek's lands, even before any formal conflict had begun, testing the boundaries of Cale's protection and authority. Elena felt a growing sense of urgency as the pieces of this puzzle continued falling into place. She and Finn spent the remainder of their time in Hollow Creek gathering as much evidence as possible, documenting the locations of contaminated soil, interviewing additional witnesses, and even venturing carefully into the eastern forest to search for any remaining traces of the mysterious markings that villagers had described. They found faint remnants of carved symbols on 2 separate trees, weathered but still visible enough to sketch and preserve as evidence. As they prepared to return to the fortress, Elena took time for one final visit with her family, wanting to memorize every detail of this brief reunion before returning to the uncertainty that awaited her. She spoke privately with her father about her suspicions, trusting him enough to share the fuller picture of what she and Cale believed might be happening, though she asked him to keep this information confidential to avoid causing panic among the other villagers before they had gathered enough proof to act with confidence. Edmund listened carefully, his expression growing increasingly concerned as Elena explained the political tensions between Cale's territory and Draven's pack, and the possibility that Hollow Creek had become an unwitting target in this larger conflict. He promised to keep watch for any further unusual occurrences, and to alert Elena immediately through the messengers that regularly traveled between the fortress and the village as part of their renewed alliance. The journey back to the fortress felt different from Elena's initial arrival months earlier. Where she had once traveled north with fear and uncertainty about an unknown future, she now returned with a clearer sense of purpose, carrying evidence that could prove crucial in protecting both her old home and her new one from a threat that had been growing quietly in the shadows. Finn remained largely silent during their return journey, clearly processing the implications of what they had discovered, occasionally sharing observations about how this evidence might fit into the larger investigation that Cale and his trusted advisors had been conducting. When they finally arrived back at the fortress, Elena immediately sought out Cale to share everything they had learned. She found him in his private study, surrounded by maps and documents that suggested he had been conducting his own parallel investigation while she and Finn traveled to Hollow Creek. He listened intently as she described the discolored soil patterns, the strange lights witnessed by villagers, and most significantly, the territorial markings they had discovered carved into trees along the eastern boundary. Cale's expression grew increasingly serious as she spoke, and when she finished, he shared his own findings from the investigation his scouts had conducted along the border regions. They had discovered similar territorial markings in 3 other locations, each situated near villages or resource-rich lands that fell under Cale's protection, suggesting a coordinated effort rather than an isolated incident affecting only Hollow Creek. Together, they spread out the various pieces of evidence across his study table, working to piece together a complete picture of what appeared to be a deliberate, methodical campaign by Draven's territory to weaken Cale's influence across multiple fronts simultaneously. The pattern suggested careful planning, resources dedicated specifically to this campaign of sabotage, and a level of coordination that indicated Draven had likely been planning this expansion for a considerable amount of time before the recent tensions became publicly apparent. Elena felt a mixture of vindication and deep concern as she reviewed the evidence laid out before them. Her instincts about the deliberate nature of Hollow Creek's suffering had been correct, but the scope of the threat now appeared far larger and more serious than either of them had initially anticipated. This was not simply a matter of political tension or minor territorial disputes between rival alphas. This represented a genuine and immediate danger to the safety and stability of the entire Northern Territory under Cale's protection. Cale thanked Elena sincerely for the crucial evidence she and Finn had gathered, acknowledging that her unique position as someone trusted by both the human village and the wolf pack had allowed them to uncover information that his scouts alone might never have discovered. He explained that they would need to move carefully from this point forward, gathering additional confirmation before confronting Draven directly, while also taking steps to strengthen defenses across the vulnerable territories that had already been targeted. As they continued discussing their next steps late into the evening, Elena found herself increasingly impressed by Cale's careful, strategic approach to the growing crisis. He did not react with impulsive anger or rush toward confrontation, but instead methodically considered every angle, every potential consequence of different courses of action, weighing the safety of his people against the risks of allowing Draven's schemes to continue unchecked. She understood now, more clearly than ever, why the pack held him in such deep respect and trust. Before retiring for the night, Cale expressed his gratitude to Elena once more, his words carrying a warmth and sincerity that had grown increasingly present in his interactions with her over recent weeks. He told her that he was grateful not just for her assistance with the investigation, but for the partnership she had brought into a life that had often felt isolating and burdensome before her arrival. Elena felt her heart swell at his words, recognizing the growing bond between them that had emerged from shared purpose and mutual respect, rather than the forced circumstances that had originally brought them together. That night, as Elena finally settled into sleep, her mind drifted between concern for the dangers still ahead and a quiet, unexpected happiness at the connection continuing to develop between herself and the man she had married under such difficult circumstances. Whatever challenges awaited them in confronting Draven's growing threat, she felt increasingly confident that she would face them, not as a passive bystander, but as a true partner standing beside Cale, ready to protect everyone and everything that mattered most to both of them. Weeks passed as Cale and his advisors worked carefully to strengthen the defenses of the territories most vulnerable to Draven's growing ambitions. Elena found herself increasingly involved in these preparations, attending strategy meetings where she offered valuable insight into how the affected human villages might best be protected and informed, without causing widespread panic among their populations. During this time, Elena's relationship with Cale continued to deepen in ways that surprised her. What had begun as a marriage of political necessity had gradually transformed into something that felt genuinely warm and collaborative. They shared meals together most evenings, discussing the day's developments, and sometimes simply talking about lighter subjects, memories from their respective childhoods, favorite books, or hopes for what peace might eventually look like across their territories. Elena learned more about Cale's past during these conversations, including the loss of his mother when he was still quite young, an event that had left him particularly close to his father, before that relationship too was cut short by circumstances that Cale still seemed reluctant to fully discuss. She sensed that there was more to the story of his father's death than he had shared with her, but she did not push, recognizing that trust between them was still being built carefully, piece by piece. In turn, Elena shared stories about her own upbringing in Hollow Creek, the simple pleasures of village life that she had once taken for granted, the close bond she shared with her sister Lily, and the values her parents had instilled in her about courage, sacrifice, and caring for one's community above personal comfort. Cale listened to these stories with genuine interest, often remarking that her upbringing explained much about the character and determination he had come to admire in her. One evening, as they walked together along the fortress walls overlooking the territory below, bathed in the soft light of a rising moon, Cale finally addressed something that had clearly been weighing on his mind. He told Elena that he needed to share the full truth about his father's death, information he had kept guarded even from most members of his own pack, but which felt important for her to understand given the current threats they faced. He explained that his father had died not from illness or old age, as most within the pack believed, but from wounds sustained during a confrontation with a rival territory many years earlier, a conflict that had involved Draven's own father, who had ruled that Western territory before Draven inherited leadership. The details remained murky even to Cale, but he suspected that the current tensions with Draven might be rooted in this older, unresolved conflict between their two families, a grudge passed down through generations that Draven now seemed determined to settle through renewed aggression. Elena felt the weight of this revelation, understanding now why Cale carried such careful vigilance regarding threats to his territory, why the current situation with Draven felt personal to him in ways that extended beyond simple political strategy. She reached for his hand, offering silent comfort, and was surprised when he accepted the gesture, his fingers intertwining with hers as they continued walking along the fortress walls in comfortable silence. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed among the pack. Nora mentioned to Elena during one of their regular conversations that the wolves throughout the fortress had begun speaking more warmly about their new Luna, the traditional title given to an alpha's mate, noting how Elena's genuine care for both the human villages and the wolf pack had earned widespread respect that extended far beyond the political necessity that had initially brought her into this position. This growing acceptance brought Elena a sense of belonging she had not expected to find within the fortress walls, though it also came with increased scrutiny and responsibility. She began taking a more active role in fortress affairs, working alongside Mira in the infirmary to better understand pack customs around healing and wellness, and joining Cale during meetings with visiting dignitaries from allied territories who sought to understand more about the threat posed by Draven's expanding ambitions. However, not everyone within the fortress welcomed Elena's growing influence with the same warmth. She noticed a particular coldness from a wolf named Bram, one of Cale's senior advisors who had served the fortress for many years under both Cale and his father before him. Bram's interactions with Elena remained polite but distant, and she often caught him watching her with an expression of guarded suspicion that she could not quite understand. When she mentioned this observation to Mira, her friend explained gently that Bram had lost his own family many years ago, during conflicts between wolf territories and human settlements, circumstances that had left him deeply distrustful of relationships between humans and wolves, even one as significant as the marriage between the Alpha King and his human bride. Mira assured Elena that Bram's loyalty to Kale remained absolute, but that his personal history made it difficult for him to fully embrace the changes Elena's presence had brought to fortress life. Elena took this information to heart, making a conscious effort to demonstrate her genuine commitment to protecting both human and wolf interests whenever she interacted with Bram, hoping that time and consistent action might eventually earn his trust, as it had with so many others throughout the fortress. Though progress remained slow, she began noticing small shifts in his demeanor, moments where his guarded expression softened slightly during their interactions, suggesting that her efforts were not entirely in vain. As the investigation into Draven's activities continued, disturbing new evidence began emerging from the border territories. Scouts reported increased wolf activity along the western boundaries, larger hunting parties than usual, venturing closer to Kale's territory than diplomatic protocols typically allowed. Additionally, 2 more villages under Kale's protection reported experiencing unusual crop failures, similar to what had struck Hollow Creek months earlier, along with sightings of the same mysterious territorial markings that Elena and Finn had discovered during their investigation. Kale called an emergency meeting with his senior advisors and closest allies to discuss how to respond to this escalating pattern of aggression. Elena was invited to attend, a significant gesture given the traditionally male-dominated nature of pack leadership councils, and one that several advisors, including Bram, seemed to view with visible surprise. During the meeting, Kale explained that he believed Draven was deliberately testing the boundaries of his territory, probing for weaknesses before potentially launching a more direct confrontation. The advisors debated various strategies, ranging from immediate military mobilization to more cautious diplomatic approaches that might avoid escalating tensions into open conflict. Elena offered her own perspective, drawing on her understanding of the affected human villages, to suggest that strengthening protective measures for these vulnerable communities should remain a top priority, regardless of which broader strategy the pack ultimately pursued. Her suggestion was met with thoughtful consideration from most of the advisors present, including, notably, a slight nod of approval from Bram himself. After lengthy discussion, the council agreed on a measured approach that would involve reinforcing defenses along the most vulnerable border regions, while simultaneously attempting one final diplomatic outreach to Draven, offering him an opportunity to address the tensions through peaceful negotiation before any further escalation occurred. Kale would personally lead this diplomatic mission, accompanied by a small delegation that would include Elena, given her unique perspective as someone who bridged both the human and wolf communities affected by this growing conflict. Elena felt a mixture of nervousness and determination at the prospect of directly confronting Draven again, remembering the cold calculation she had witnessed in his eyes during their brief encounter at the full moon gathering. But she also recognized the importance of standing beside Kale during this critical moment, demonstrating unified strength and shared purpose in the face of a threat that endangered everyone she now considered family, both human and wolf alike. In the days leading up to their diplomatic journey to Draven's territory, Elena spent considerable time preparing herself mentally for whatever confrontation might await them. She practiced with Finn in the training yards, learning basic self-defense techniques that might prove useful should negotiations fail to prevent violence. She also spent long hours with Kale, reviewing what they knew about Draven's territory, his known allies, and the specific grievances that seemed to be driving his aggressive expansion. Through these preparations, Elena's bond with Kale continued strengthening, built not just on the growing affection between them, but on a deepening trust and mutual reliance that came from facing genuine danger together. On the night before their departure for Draven's territory, Kale came to Elena's chamber, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had seen since their very first meeting behind his mask. He told her that he had never expected to find in this arranged marriage the kind of partnership and genuine connection that had developed between them over these past months. He admitted that he had approached their union with careful emotional distance, expecting nothing more than a political arrangement, but that Elena's courage, wisdom, and genuine care for others had gradually broken down those barriers in ways he had not anticipated or initially welcomed. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes as she listened to his heartfelt admission, recognizing that this moment represented something significant in their relationship, an acknowledgement of feelings that had grown far beyond the original necessity that had brought them together. She told him that she too had never expected to find genuine happiness within this arrangement, but that his patience, honesty, and quiet strength had earned not just her respect, but her deepening affection as well. As they stood together in her chamber that night, the weight of the dangerous journey ahead pressing heavily upon them both, Elena and Cale allowed themselves this moment of genuine emotional connection, a brief respite from the political tensions and looming threats that had dominated their recent months together. Whatever awaited them in Draven's territory, they would face it together, no longer simply as strangers bound by necessity, but as true partners who had discovered something precious and unexpected within the circumstances that had originally brought them together. The journey toward Draven's territory took 3 days, winding through increasingly unfamiliar landscapes that grew rockier and more barren the further west they traveled. Elena rode alongside Cale at the head of their small delegation, which included Finn, Bram, and a handful of trusted guards selected specifically for this sensitive diplomatic mission. The mood throughout the journey remained tense, everyone acutely aware of the delicate nature of what awaited them. As they crossed into the boundaries of Draven's territory, the landscape's transformation became even more apparent. Where Cale's lands featured lush forests and well-maintained farmland, this western territory showed clear signs of struggle. Fields that appeared poorly managed, forests that seemed thinner and less carefully tended. Elena began to understand more fully why Draven's territory might be experiencing the resource shortages that Cale had mentioned earlier, difficulties that could partially explain, though certainly not excuse, his aggressive expansion into neighboring lands. Draven's stronghold, when it finally came into view, presented a stark contrast to Cale's fortress. Where Cale's home conveyed a sense of ancient stability and careful stewardship, Draven's territory felt harsher, more recently expanded, through what appeared to be forceful conquest rather than generations of careful development. The wolves who greeted their delegation at the gates carried themselves with a rougher, more aggressive energy than Elena had grown accustomed to within Cale's own pack. They were led into a great hall that lacked the refined elegance of Cale's fortress, functional but sparse, decorated primarily with trophies from hunts and battles, rather than the historical tapestries and artwork that filled Cale's halls. Draven awaited them there, seated upon a rough-hewn throne, his expression carrying the same calculating coldness Elena remembered from their previous encounter, though now amplified by the confidence of receiving them within his own territory. The negotiations began formally, with Cale addressing the concerns directly, presenting the evidence they had gathered regarding the territorial markings and crop contamination affecting villages under his protection. He spoke carefully but firmly, avoiding direct accusations while making clear that these patterns of aggression could not continue without serious consequences for the peace between their territories. Draven listened with an expression that revealed little, occasionally offering dismissive responses that suggested he viewed Cale's concerns as either exaggerated or entirely unfounded. He claimed no knowledge of the territorial markings, suggesting instead that perhaps some rogue elements within his own pack, acting without his authority or knowledge, might be responsible for such actions, though his tone carried little genuine conviction behind these denials. Elena watched this exchange carefully, noting the subtle tells in Draven's body language that suggested calculated deception rather than honest confusion. She had spent enough time observing genuine diplomatic exchanges within Cale's fortress to recognize the difference between authentic uncertainty and practiced dismissal. When Cale pressed further, presenting specific details about the timing and locations of the various incidents, Draven's composure began showing small cracks of irritation beneath his carefully maintained calm exterior. The negotiations continued for several hours, with both sides presenting their positions, while carefully avoiding any actions that might escalate the tense standoff into open conflict. Elena contributed when appropriate, offering perspective on how the affected human villages had suffered under these circumstances, appealing to whatever sense of broader responsibility Draven might hold toward the territories and peoples affected by this ongoing pattern of sabotage and aggression. At one point during the discussions, Draven turned his attention directly toward Elena, his expression shifting into something that resembled genuine curiosity, rather than the cold calculation he had displayed throughout most of the meeting. He asked her pointed questions about her experience transitioning from human village life into her new role within Kale's pack, questions that seemed designed to probe for weaknesses or tensions within her marriage that he might potentially exploit for his own advantage. Elena answered carefully, refusing to give Draven any indication of vulnerability or discord that he might attempt to leverage against their unified position. She spoke instead about the genuine respect and partnership she had found within her marriage, emphasizing the strength of the alliance between the human villages and Kale's pack, a unity that she made clear would not be easily broken by whatever schemes Draven might be attempting to orchestrate against their shared interests. Her confident, measured response seemed to catch Draven slightly off guard, and Elena noticed a flicker of something calculating cross his features, as though he were reassessing his approach given her unexpected resilience. Kale, watching this exchange, stepped in to redirect the conversation back toward the primary matters of concern, making clear that any attempts to create division between himself and Elena would prove entirely fruitless. As the negotiations drew toward their conclusion, Draven finally offered what appeared to be a conciliatory gesture, agreeing to investigate the possibility of rogue elements within his own pack, and promising to take appropriate action should such elements be identified. He also agreed to a temporary pause in any further expansion of hunting parties near the shared border territories, though Elena noticed that his agreement carried careful qualifications and vague timelines that left considerable room for future non-compliance. Kale accepted these terms with visible skepticism, making clear that he would be monitoring the situation closely, and that any further incidents of sabotage or aggressive territorial expansion would be met with decisive response. The formal negotiations concluded with a tense but civil farewell between the two alphas, neither fully trusting the other, but both recognizing, for the moment, the value of avoiding open conflict, while further evidence and circumstances continued developing. As their delegation prepared to depart Draven's territory, Elena found herself approached briefly by one of Draven's own advisors, an older wolf who introduced himself quietly as Rowan. He spoke in hushed tones, clearly wary of being overheard by his own pack members, warning Elena that Draven's promises during the negotiations should not be trusted, that internal pressures within his own territory were pushing him toward increasingly desperate and aggressive actions, regardless of any temporary agreements reached during formal diplomatic exchanges. Elena thanked Rowan for this candid warning, recognizing the risk he had taken in sharing such information, and promised to relay his concerns directly to Kale. As their delegation finally departed Draven's stronghold and began their journey back toward familiar territory, Elena shared Rowan's warning with Kale, watching his expression grow increasingly grim as he processed this additional confirmation of the genuine danger that continued lurking beneath the surface of their temporary diplomatic agreement. Kale explained that this warning aligned with intelligence his own scouts had been gathering, suggesting that internal factions within Draven's pack were indeed pushing for more aggressive action, potentially even undermining Draven's own authority should he prove unwilling to pursue the expansion and resources that many within his struggling territory desperately desired. This meant that even if Draven himself wished to honor the agreements made during their negotiation, external pressures from his own pack might ultimately override his intentions. This sobering realization cast a shadow over their journey home, as both Elena and Kale recognized that the temporary peace achieved through their diplomatic mission likely represented only a brief pause rather than a genuine resolution to the underlying conflict. They discussed various contingency plans throughout their journey, preparing for the possibility that renewed aggression might emerge regardless of the formal agreements reached during their meeting with Draven. Despite the concerning implications of what they had learned, Elena found herself increasingly confident in her own ability to contribute meaningfully to these high-stakes political and strategic discussions. She had proven during the negotiations that she could hold her own against Draven's attempts at manipulation, and her willingness to engage directly with the dangerous realities facing their combined territories had earned even greater respect from Kale and the other members of their delegation, including, she noticed with quiet satisfaction, an increasingly warmer demeanor from Bram himself. As their journey brought them back within the familiar boundaries of Kale's territory, Elena felt a complex mixture of relief at escaping the tense atmosphere of Draven's stronghold, combined with continued anxiety about what future conflicts might still await them. She and Kale discussed strategies for strengthening their defenses further, for maintaining vigilant monitoring of the border territories, and for preparing their allies and the affected human villages for whatever challenges might yet emerge from this simmering tension with their western neighbors. That evening, once they had finally returned to the safety of their own fortress, Kale expressed his gratitude to Elena for her invaluable contributions throughout their diplomatic mission, acknowledging that her presence and insight had strengthened their position significantly during the difficult negotiations with Draven. He told her that he could not imagine facing these mounting challenges without her steady courage and wisdom beside him, words that filled Elena with a deep sense of purpose and belonging within this life she had never expected to find herself living. As they settled into their private chambers that night, both physically and emotionally exhausted from the demanding journey and negotiations, Elena reflected on how far she had come since that first terrified night when she had married a masked stranger to save her village. She was no longer simply a frightened young woman thrust into unfamiliar circumstances, but had become a trusted advisor and genuine partner to the most powerful figure in the Northern Territories, someone whose insights and courage were increasingly recognized and valued by everyone around her. Yet even as she took quiet pride in this transformation, Elena remained acutely aware that the greatest challenges likely still lay ahead. Draven's territory continued harboring dangerous ambitions and internal pressures that threatened the fragile peace they had temporarily secured, and the safety of everyone she cared about, both in Hollow Creek and within Kale's own pack, remained far from guaranteed. Whatever conflicts awaited them in the days and weeks to come, Elena knew she would face them with the same determination and courage that had brought her this far, standing firmly beside the man who had become far more than simply her husband out of necessity, but her true partner in facing whatever dangers the future might hold. In the weeks following their return from Draven's territory, life within Kale's fortress settled into an uneasy calm. Scouts continued monitoring the border regions closely, watching for any signs that Draven's promised restraint might be crumbling under the internal pressures Rowan had warned Elena about during their brief conversation. For a time, the reports remained encouraging, with no new incidents of sabotage or aggressive territorial movements reported from any of the affected villages. Elena used this period of relative peace to deepen her understanding of pack customs and responsibilities, spending increasing amounts of time working alongside Mira in the infirmary and joining Kale during his regular administrative duties, overseeing the various territories under his protection. She began to understand the full scope of responsibilities that came with her position as Luna, learning to mediate minor disputes between pack members, oversee resource distribution to villages experiencing hardship, and represent the interests of the human communities within the broader pack council discussions. Her relationship with Bram continued improving during this time as well. The senior advisor, having witnessed Elena's steady composure and valuable contributions during the tense negotiations with Draven, gradually began treating her with genuine warmth, rather than the guarded distance he had maintained during her early months at the fortress. One afternoon, he approached her directly, sharing more details about the loss of his own family during earlier conflicts, explaining that her demonstrated commitment to protecting both human and wolf interests had helped him see past his own historical grievances to recognize the genuine value she brought to their community. This growing acceptance from Bram meant a great deal to Elena, representing a significant milestone in her full integration into pack life. She found herself increasingly comfortable moving through the fortress, no longer viewed with the wary curiosity that had marked her early days there, but instead greeted with genuine respect and warmth by pack members across all levels of the community hierarchy. Meanwhile, Elena's relationship with Kale continued deepening in ways that brought her genuine happiness, despite the political tensions still simmering beneath the surface of their careful peace with Draven's territory. They had grown remarkably close, sharing not just the practical partnership of managing their combined responsibilities, but also a genuine emotional intimacy that neither had expected to find within their originally arranged marriage. One evening, as they walked together through the fortress gardens, an area Elena had come to treasure for its quiet beauty and the rare moments of privacy it offered away from the constant demands of pack business, Kale shared with her a story about his childhood that revealed new dimensions of the man she had come to love. He described memories of his mother, teaching him about the responsibilities of leadership before her passing, emphasizing that true strength came not from dominance or fear, but from genuine care for those under one's protection. Elena listened with growing tenderness as Cale spoke, recognizing how deeply these early lessons had shaped the fair, thoughtful leader he had become, despite the immense pressures and losses he had experienced throughout his life. She shared in return memories of her own mother's teachings, emphasizing similar values of community and sacrifice that had guided her own decision to volunteer for this marriage in the first place, protecting her sister from a fate she herself was willing to face. As their conversation deepened into the evening, surrounded by the fragrant blooms of the fortress gardens under a canopy of emerging stars, Cale finally spoke words that Elena had begun hoping to hear, though she had not dared to voice such hopes even to herself. He told her that what had begun as a political arrangement born of necessity had transformed, through her courage, wisdom, and genuine care, into something he now recognized as true love, a bond that extended far beyond the formal obligations of their marriage. He explained the ancient wolf tradition of true mates, a concept that went beyond simple marriage or political alliance, representing instead a deep, soul-level connection, recognized by very few wolves throughout each generation. He told Elena that from the very beginning, even before he had revealed his identity to her, something within him had recognized this connection, though he had fought against acknowledging it fully given the political complexity and danger surrounding their union. Elena felt overwhelming emotion at this heartfelt declaration, recognizing that her own feelings had grown to mirror his completely over these past months. What had begun as fear and uncertainty when she first arrived at this fortress had gradually transformed into genuine affection, then deepening respect, and now, she realized with clarity, into true love for this complex, thoughtful man who had become far more than simply her husband, but her closest companion and truest partner in facing whatever challenges life presented. She told Cale that she too recognized this profound connection between them, that her heart had been gradually opening to him since that very first night, when he had spoken to her with unexpected gentleness, despite the frightening mask he wore. She confessed that she could no longer imagine her life without him beside her, that whatever future challenges awaited their territories and their people, she wanted to face them together, as true partners, bound not just by political necessity, but by genuine love. Their emotional declaration marked a significant turning point in their relationship, solidifying a bond that would prove crucial in the challenges still awaiting them. As they returned from the gardens that evening, walking hand in hand through the familiar halls of the fortress that had become Elena's true home, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected path her life had taken, from a frightened village girl volunteering to save her sister, to the beloved and true mate of the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. However, this period of happiness and growing stability would soon face its greatest test. Just days after their heartfelt declaration in the garden, disturbing news arrived from the border regions. A scouting party had discovered evidence of a significant gathering of wolves near Draven's eastern boundary, far larger than any routine hunting party or patrol, suggesting preparations for something considerably more serious than the sporadic sabotage they had dealt with previously. Cale immediately convened his council of advisors to assess this new development, and Elena joined the discussion, her position as Luna and trusted advisor now fully accepted by even the most traditional members of the council. The scouts reported that this gathering included wolves from beyond Draven's own territory, suggesting he had begun recruiting allies from other struggling packs in the region, promising them shares of conquered resources should their combined forces succeed in overwhelming Cale's territory. This revelation confirmed the fears that Rowan's earlier warning had planted, that internal pressures within Draven's pack, combined with his own ambitious ruthlessness, had ultimately overridden whatever temporary restraint the diplomatic negotiations had achieved. The peace they had worked so hard to maintain now appeared to be crumbling entirely, replaced by the very real threat of large-scale conflict that could endanger not just Cale's fortress, but every human village and wolf community under his protection, including Hollow Creek itself. Elena felt a surge of fierce protective determination as she listened to the council debate their options. She thought of her family back in Hollow Creek, of Lily's gentle spirit, of her father's steady strength, of the community that had raised her and taught her the values of courage and sacrifice that had brought her to this position in the first place. She would not allow Draven's ambitious cruelty to destroy everything she had come to love and protect. both her original home and the new life she had built within Cale's territory. The council began developing strategic plans for defending against this potential large-scale assault, discussing troop movements, defensive fortifications for the most vulnerable villages, and potential alliances with neighboring territories who might be willing to assist against this growing threat from Draven's coalition. Cale took charge of coordinating these efforts with characteristic calm efficiency, though Elena could sense the deep concern he carried beneath his composed exterior, worry not just for his own territory, but for Elena's safety and that of her family should conflict truly erupt. As preparations intensified over the following days, Elena insisted on taking an active role in the defensive planning, drawing on her intimate knowledge of Hollow Creek's layout and vulnerabilities to help design effective protective measures for the village. She also worked closely with Mira to establish emergency medical supply stations that could be quickly deployed should fighting break out, drawing on lessons learned from her time working in the fortress infirmary. Despite the mounting tension and very real danger now facing their combined territories, Elena found unexpected strength in the love and partnership she now shared fully with Cale. Where she had once felt isolated and frightened within these unfamiliar circumstances, she now stood confidently beside her true mate, ready to face whatever conflict Draven's ambitions might unleash upon them, fortified by the genuine bond of love and mutual respect that had grown between them since that very first uncertain night of their arranged marriage. As night fell over the fortress, with defensive preparations continuing around the clock and messengers dispatched to allied territories seeking additional support, Elena and Cale found a brief quiet moment together, holding each other close as they contemplated the uncertain days ahead. Whatever battles awaited them, they faced this looming crisis together, their love now a source of strength rather than vulnerability, a true partnership forged through months of shared challenges and deepening trust that would prove essential in the conflict now bearing down upon their combined territories. The warning signs had been building for days, but nothing could have fully prepared Elena for the moment Nora rushed into her chamber early one morning, her face pale with fear, explaining that Mira had gone missing during her routine visit to gather herbs from the forest just beyond the fortress boundaries. Search parties had been dispatched immediately, but as the hours passed without any sign of the healer, a growing dread settled over the entire fortress community. By midday, a messenger arrived carrying a folded piece of parchment addressed directly to Cale, delivered by an unfamiliar wolf who disappeared into the forest before anyone could question him further. The message, written in Draven's own hand, as Cale quickly recognized from previous diplomatic correspondence, confirmed everyone's worst fears. Mira had indeed been taken, held as leverage to force Cale's territory into standing down from their defensive preparations, with an explicit threat that harm would come to her should Cale attempt any rescue mission or continue strengthening his alliances against Draven's coalition. Elena felt a cold fury unlike anything she had experienced since arriving at the fortress. Mira had become one of her closest friends, someone who had shown her genuine kindness and support since her very first uncertain days within this unfamiliar world. The thought of her friend held captive, potentially frightened and in danger, filled Elena with a fierce determination to do whatever necessary to secure her safe return. Cale called an emergency council meeting, his expression carrying a controlled but unmistakable rage at this direct and personal attack against a member of his pack. The advisors debated various response strategies, with some urging immediate military action to rescue Mira by force, while others cautioned that such an approach might play directly into whatever trap Draven had carefully constructed, potentially endangering Mira further, while also providing justification for the larger conflict he seemed intent on provoking. Elena listened to this debate with growing impatience, understanding the strategic concerns being raised, but unable to accept any plan that left her friend in danger for an extended period, while careful deliberations continued. She spoke up, proposing an alternative approach that drew on her unique position and the relationship she had built during their previous diplomatic visit to Draven's territory, including the quiet warning she had received from Rowan, suggesting that not everyone within Draven's pack fully supported his aggressive ambitions. She suggested that a small, carefully selected team might be able to infiltrate Draven's territory discreetly, potentially locating Mira, with assistance from sympathetic contacts like Rowan, and executing a rescue before Draven's larger coalition forces could be fully mobilized for open conflict. This approach carried significant risk, but Elena argued passionately that swift, decisive action offered the best chance of securing Mira's safety, while also potentially disrupting Draven's momentum before his alliance grew too powerful to challenge effectively. Cale listened to Elena's proposal with visible concern, torn between his desire to protect Mira and his fear for Elena's safety should she insist on being personally involved in such a dangerous mission. He argued that her position as Luna made her too valuable and too vulnerable to risk on an infiltration mission into hostile territory, suggesting that Finn and a small team of trusted warriors could execute the rescue without her direct involvement. Elena pushed back firmly, reminding Cale that her relationship with Rowan, established during their previous diplomatic visit, represented a crucial asset that could not be easily replicated by anyone else within their fortress. She also pointed out that her intimate understanding of both human and wolf perspectives might prove valuable in navigating the delicate circumstances of extracting Mira without triggering full-scale conflict prematurely. After considerable debate, Cale reluctantly agreed to allow Elena's participation, though he insisted on personally leading the rescue mission alongside her, unwilling to remain behind while she faced such danger. The team assembled quickly, including Cale, Elena, Finn, and 2 additional trusted warriors selected for their stealth and combat capabilities. They departed under cover of darkness, moving swiftly and carefully through the forest paths that connected their territories, avoiding the main roads where Draven's forces might be watching for exactly this kind of response to his provocative message. As they approached the boundary of Draven's territory, Elena's thoughts turned to Rowan, hoping desperately that the older advisor's earlier warning represented genuine sympathy that might now translate into willingness to assist their rescue mission. Cale had arranged, through careful and discreet channels, a possible meeting point where Rowan might provide crucial information about Mira's location within Draven's stronghold. Their patience was rewarded when Rowan appeared at the designated meeting point, his expression grave as he confirmed that Mira was indeed being held within a secured chamber in the eastern wing of Draven's fortress, guarded, but not yet subjected to any serious harm. He explained that internal dissent within Draven's own pack had been growing, with several senior members expressing serious reservations about this direct provocation against Cale's territory, fearing the consequences of open conflict against a stronger, better organized rival. Rowan offered to help guide their small team through a lesser-known entrance into the fortress, one that would allow them to bypass the heaviest concentrations of guards while making their way toward the chamber where Mira was being held. He warned that timing would be critical, as Draven's forces were expected to shift their patrol patterns during the coming hours, in preparation for what he believed were plans to move Mira to an even more secure location, deeper within contested territory. With Rowan's guidance, the rescue team moved carefully through the shadows surrounding Draven's fortress, using the cover of night and Rowan's intimate knowledge of the guard rotations to avoid detection. Elena's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination as they approached the eastern wing, every sound in the darkness sending fresh waves of adrenaline through her body. They encountered resistance near the final approach to Mira's chamber, a pair of guards whose alertness suggested they had not been fully briefed on the reduced security that Rowan had promised. Finn and the other warriors moved swiftly to subdue them without unnecessary harm, careful to avoid raising alarms that might alert the broader fortress to their presence. Elena watched with tense admiration as Cale's team executed their movements with practiced precision, minimizing conflict while ensuring their continued advance toward Mira's location. When they finally reached the chamber where Mira was being held, Elena felt overwhelming relief at seeing her friend alive and largely unharmed, though clearly shaken by the ordeal of her captivity. Mira's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude as Elena rushed to embrace her, quickly explaining their rescue plan and the need to move swiftly before Draven's forces discovered their intrusion. As they began making their way back toward the fortress exit, however, their careful stealth was finally compromised. An alarm sounded somewhere within the depths of the stronghold, alerting the broader guard force to the presence of intruders. Elena's heart raced as she realized their window for a quiet, undetected escape had closed, and they would now need to fight their way back toward safety. Cale took immediate command of the situation, directing their small team toward the fastest possible route back to the forest boundary, while positioning himself to handle any pursuing threats. Elena stayed close to Mira, helping guide her friend through the chaotic scramble as guards began converging on their position from multiple directions throughout the fortress corridors. The escape that followed tested every bit of courage and resourcefulness Elena had developed since her arrival in this world of wolves and political intrigue. She helped navigate their group through unfamiliar passages, drawing on details Rowan had shared during their earlier conversation, while Cale and his warriors worked to hold back pursuing guards, without escalating the confrontation into a full engagement that might trigger the larger conflict everyone had been trying to avoid. Finally, after tense minutes that felt like hours, their group broke free from the fortress grounds and disappeared into the surrounding forest, moving quickly to put distance between themselves and any pursuing forces before Draven could organize a more coordinated response. Rowan had accompanied them partway before turning back, explaining that his continued presence within Draven's pack remained crucial for monitoring future developments and providing warning of any escalating threats. As their exhausted but relieved group finally crossed back into the safety of Cale's own territory, Elena felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude wash over her, both for Mira's safe rescue and for the courage and skill that Cale and his warriors had demonstrated throughout this dangerous mission. Mira, still processing the frightening ordeal of her captivity, expressed heartfelt thanks to Elena and Cale for risking so much to secure her freedom, a debt of gratitude that would strengthen the bonds between them even further. However, even as they celebrated this successful rescue, everyone understood that this dramatic confrontation had likely eliminated any remaining possibility of avoiding open conflict with Draven's territory. His direct kidnapping of Mira, followed by their equally direct rescue mission, represented an escalation that would almost certainly provoke a more aggressive response from Draven, who would likely view this successful rescue as a humiliating defeat, requiring immediate retaliation to preserve his authority among his own increasingly restless pack. That night, as their exhausted party finally returned to the safety of the fortress, Cale gathered his council once more to prepare for what now seemed an inevitable confrontation. Elena stood beside him, no longer simply an observer or advisor, but a proven partner who had demonstrated her courage and capability during this dangerous rescue mission. Whatever battles lay ahead in the coming days, she knew she would face them standing firmly beside Cale, ready to protect everyone she loved from the growing storm that Draven's ambitions had unleashed upon their combined territories. The days following Mira's rescue passed in a blur of urgent preparation. Scouts confirmed Elena and Cale's worst fears, reporting that Draven had begun mobilizing his coalition forces in earnest, moving large numbers of wolves toward the border regions closest to Hollow Creek, apparently intending to strike at the very village that had first drawn Elena into this world of political conflict and unexpected love. Cale immediately dispatched additional warriors to reinforce Hollow Creek's defenses, while also sending urgent messages to allied territories requesting whatever support they could provide against Draven's growing coalition. Elena insisted on traveling to her home village personally, wanting to help coordinate defensive preparations and ensure her family's safety as the threat of conflict grew increasingly imminent. When she arrived in Hollow Creek alongside a contingent of Cale's warriors, Elena found the village in a state of anxious preparation. Word of the growing conflict had reached the villagers through the regular messengers who traveled between the fortress and the village, and while fear was evident on many faces, Elena also witnessed a determined resolve among her former neighbors, a community drawing together to protect their homes and families against the looming threat. She worked alongside her father and the village elders to organize defensive measures, positioning the strongest and most capable villagers at strategic points around the settlement's perimeter, while ensuring that children, the elderly, and other vulnerable community members had clear plans for reaching safety should fighting actually reach the village itself. Cale's warriors integrated with these preparations, sharing tactical knowledge that helped strengthen the village's overall readiness. Elena's sister Lily, now visibly more mature after the months of uncertainty since Elena's departure, insisted on contributing to the preparations as well, working alongside Mira, who had traveled to Hollow Creek to help establish emergency medical stations should the conflict result in injuries among the defenders. Elena felt immense pride watching her younger sister demonstrate the same courage and determination that had characterized their family's response to hardship throughout Elena's own life. As reports continued arriving describing Draven's forces drawing ever closer to the village's borders, Cale arrived personally to take command of the defensive efforts, having secured commitments of support from 2 allied territories whose warriors were now marching to reinforce Hollow Creek's position. His presence brought a renewed sense of confidence to the defenders, both human and wolf alike, as they prepared for what increasingly appeared to be an unavoidable confrontation. The night before the anticipated conflict, Elena and Cale shared quiet, precious moments together, discussing their hopes for a future beyond this looming battle, a peaceful territory, where their combined communities could thrive, without the constant threat of Draven's aggressive ambitions hanging over them. They spoke of the family they might someday build together, of the continued growth of the partnership between Hollow Creek and the Wolf territories, of a future built on the genuine love and respect that had grown between them since their arranged marriage began. As dawn broke on the day that would determine the fate of Hollow Creek and the broader peace between their territories, scouts confirmed that Draven's coalition forces had finally arrived at the village's eastern boundary, their numbers significant, but not overwhelming, given the reinforcements that had gathered to defend the settlement. Cale addressed the assembled defenders, both human villagers and wolf warriors standing united, offering words of encouragement and reminding everyone present of what they were fighting to protect: their homes, their families, and the hard-won peace between their two communities. Elena stood among the defenders as the confrontation began, refusing Cale's earlier suggestion that she remain in a safer position away from the front lines. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, and grown too committed to protecting this community, to stand aside while others faced the danger on her behalf. She positioned herself where her knowledge of the village's layout could prove most valuable, helping coordinate the movement of defenders and ensuring that vulnerable areas remained adequately protected. The confrontation that followed tested the courage and resilience of everyone involved, as Draven's forces pressed against the coordinated defense that Cale and the village elders had carefully organized. Elena watched with a mixture of fear and fierce pride as the defenders, both human and wolf, worked together seamlessly, their combined efforts proving far more effective than Draven's coalition had apparently anticipated when planning this aggressive assault. Cale fought with the same impressive skill Elena had witnessed during their early days together in the fortress training yard, his leadership inspiring the defenders around him to hold their ground against the initial waves of Draven's assault. Elena found herself contributing in crucial ways as well, using her understanding of the village's terrain to help redirect defensive efforts toward areas where Draven's forces attempted to exploit weaknesses in their coordinated defense. As the confrontation continued, Elena caught sight of Draven himself, directing his forces from a position near the village's eastern edge, his expression carrying the same cold calculation she remembered from their previous encounters, though now tinged with visible frustration, as his coalition's assault failed to achieve the swift, decisive victory he had clearly anticipated. The strength of the alliance between Cale's territory and the human village of Hollow Creek was proving far more formidable than Draven's aggressive ambitions had accounted for. The turning point in the confrontation came when the reinforcements from Cale's allied territories finally arrived, having marched swiftly upon receiving word of the impending conflict. Their arrival bolstered the defenders' position significantly, creating an overwhelming advantage that began pushing Draven's coalition forces into a clear retreat. Elena watched as the tide of the confrontation shifted decisively in favor of the defenders, relief and exhaustion mixing within her, as she witnessed the beginning of what appeared to be a successful defense of her beloved home village. Cale, sensing the shifting momentum, moved directly toward Draven's position, seeking to end the confrontation through a direct challenge, rather than allowing the conflict to continue, causing unnecessary strain on both sides. The two alphas faced each other amid the chaos of the retreating coalition forces, their confrontation representing the culmination of tensions that had been building since long before Elena's arrival had brought these two territories into direct conflict. Elena watched with her heart in her throat as Cale and Draven faced off, understanding that the outcome of this direct confrontation would likely determine the final resolution of the entire conflict. Draven, recognizing that his coalition's assault had failed to achieve its intended objectives, and facing the accumulated frustration of a rival who had proven consistently more capable and better prepared throughout their ongoing tensions, ultimately chose to withdraw rather than risk a direct confrontation that carried significant personal danger, given Cale's demonstrated strength and skill. As Draven ordered his remaining forces into full retreat, the defenders of Hollow Creek erupted into exhausted but jubilant celebration, recognizing that they had successfully protected their home against what could have been a devastating assault. Elena rushed toward Cale as the immediate danger passed, relief flooding through her, as she confirmed he had emerged from the direct confrontation with Draven, largely unharmed, though clearly exhausted from the demands of both leading the defense and personally facing his longtime rival. In the aftermath of the battle, as the village began the process of recovery and the wounded received care from Mira and her medical team, Elena reflected on how dramatically her life had transformed since that first terrified night when she had volunteered to marry a masked stranger to save her village. She had grown from a frightened young woman into someone capable of standing beside the most powerful leader in the Northern Territories, contributing meaningfully to protecting not just her original home, but an entire network of communities that had come to depend on the alliance she and Kale represented. Kale found her amid the aftermath, his expression carrying deep relief and profound gratitude as he took her hands in his own. He told her that the successful defense of Hollow Creek represented far more than simply a military victory, but a powerful demonstration of the strength that came from genuine partnership and unity between their two peoples, human and wolf, bound together not just by political necessity, but by the authentic bonds of trust and love that had grown between them since their arranged marriage first began. As the sun began setting over Hollow Creek that evening, casting warm golden light across a village that had successfully defended itself against a threat that had once seemed overwhelming, Elena stood beside Kale, surrounded by her family, her friends, and the extended community of both humans and wolves who had come together in this moment of shared triumph. Whatever challenges might still lie ahead in fully resolving the tensions with Draven's territory, this day represented a powerful affirmation that the unlikely partnership born from Elena's sacrifice had grown into something capable of protecting and preserving everything they had all worked so hard to build together. In the weeks that followed the successful defense of Hollow Creek, a fragile but genuine peace began settling over the Northern Territories. Word of Draven's failed assault and his coalition's humiliating retreat spread quickly among the various packs in the region, significantly weakening his standing among the allies he had previously recruited to support his ambitious expansion. Several of the smaller packs who had joined his coalition quietly withdrew their support, unwilling to continue backing a leader whose aggressive strategies had resulted in such a decisive defeat. Rowan, whose assistance had proven so crucial during Mira's rescue, sent word through discreet channels that internal dissent within Draven's own territory had grown considerably following the failed assault, with many senior pack members openly questioning his leadership and the wisdom of continuing hostilities against a rival who had proven consistently more capable and better prepared. This growing internal pressure appeared to be pushing Draven toward a more cautious approach, at least for the foreseeable future, as he worked to rebuild his standing among his own increasingly restless pack. Kale, ever the strategic and thoughtful leader, chose not to pursue further aggressive action against Draven's weakened territory, recognizing that a magnanimous approach to this resolution might ultimately prove more valuable than continued conflict. He sent a formal message proposing a renewed and strengthened peace agreement between their territories, one that would establish clearer boundaries and expectations, while also offering limited trade assistance to help address the resource shortages that had originally driven Draven toward his desperate and aggressive expansion. This diplomatic gesture, while met with initial skepticism from some of Kale's own advisors who felt Draven deserved harsher consequences for his actions, ultimately proved wise. Draven, weakened both militarily and politically, accepted the terms of this renewed peace agreement, recognizing that continued hostility against Kale's stronger and now more unified territory offered little benefit given his current circumstances. The formal treaty was signed in a ceremony that, while lacking the warmth of genuine friendship between the two alphas, nonetheless established a stable foundation for lasting peace between their previously conflicting territories. With this significant threat finally resolved, Elena and Kale were able to turn their attention toward building the future they had discussed during those precious quiet moments before the battle for Hollow Creek. Elena's role as Luna continued expanding, with her responsibilities now encompassing not just her original village, but the broader network of human communities throughout Kale's extended territory, all of whom benefited from the strengthened protections and improved relationships that Elena's unique bridging position had helped establish. A formal coronation ceremony was announced, one that would officially recognize Elena's position as Luna of the Northern Territories, a title that carried far more significance and genuine respect than the reluctant political arrangement she had originally accepted to save her sister from an uncertain fate. The entire fortress buzzed with preparations for this celebratory event, which would bring together representatives from allied territories, the leadership of Hollow Creek and other human villages under Kale's protection, and the full assembly of the wolf pack that Elena had come to consider her true family. On the day of the coronation, Elena stood once more on the same raised platform where she had first been formally introduced to the assembled packs many months earlier, though everything about this moment felt profoundly different from that initial nervous ceremony. Where she had once stood beside a man she barely knew, uncertain of her place within this unfamiliar world, she now stood confidently beside Kale, her true mate and beloved partner, surrounded by a community that had come to genuinely respect and cherish her contributions to their collective well-being. Her family traveled from Hollow Creek to witness this significant moment, her father beaming with pride as he watched his daughter receive this formal recognition of her transformed position. Lily, now grown considerably more confident and mature through the challenges her family had faced together, stood proudly among the honored guests, having herself begun training with Mira to potentially pursue her own path within the growing partnership between the human villages and wolf territories. As Kale formally presented Elena to the assembled crowd, placing a ceremonial crown crafted specifically to honor her unique position, bridging both human and wolf communities, the entire gathering erupted into genuine enthusiastic celebration. Elena felt tears of joy gathering in her eyes as she looked out over the crowd, recognizing faces that had once regarded her with wary suspicion, now beaming with authentic warmth and respect, a transformation that reflected her own incredible journey, from frightened bride to beloved and respected leader. In his formal address to the assembled crowd, Kale spoke movingly about the journey they had shared together, from their arranged marriage born of political necessity, through the challenges and dangers they had faced together, investigating Draven's schemes, to the deep and genuine love that had ultimately grown between them despite the difficult circumstances of their initial union. He credited Elena's courage, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to protecting others as instrumental, not just in defeating the threat Draven's ambitions had posed, but in strengthening the fundamental bonds between their human and wolf communities in ways that would benefit generations to come. Following the formal ceremony, the celebration continued late into the evening, with feasting and festivities that brought together humans and wolves in genuine, joyful community, a stark contrast to the wary distrust that had characterized relationships between these two groups when Elena had first arrived at the fortress so many months earlier. She spent the evening moving among the celebrating crowd, sharing warm conversations with pack members who had become genuine friends, and with representatives from Hollow Creek and other villages who expressed heartfelt gratitude for the protection and partnership her marriage to Kale had ultimately secured for their communities. Bram approached her during the celebration, his expression carrying none of the guarded wariness that had once characterized his interactions with her. He told her sincerely that he had come to view her not just as a valuable political partner for Kale, but as a genuine friend and trusted member of their community, someone whose courage and integrity had helped him move past old wounds and grievances that had shaped his distrust for so many years. His words meant a great deal to Elena, representing the final and perhaps most meaningful transformation in her journey toward full acceptance within this once unfamiliar world. As the celebration finally began winding down in the late hours of the evening, Elena found a quiet moment alone with Kale, standing together on the same fortress walls, where he had first shared the truth about his father's difficult history many months earlier. Looking out over the peaceful territory spread before them, illuminated by moonlight and the glow of distant village lights, Elena felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and contentment at how her life had unfolded since that fearful night when she had volunteered to save her sister from an uncertain fate. Kale took her hands gently in his own, his expression carrying the same warmth and genuine love that had grown steadily between them since those early uncertain days of their arranged marriage. He told her that he could not have imagined, when he first hid behind his mask, to test whether she would value him for who he truly was, rather than his position and power, that their forced union would ultimately blossom into the deepest and most meaningful connection of his entire life. Elena, her heart full of the same profound love and gratitude, told him that her decision to volunteer for this marriage, made purely out of desperate necessity to protect her sister, had ultimately led her toward a life and a love far richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined during those frightened days back in Hollow Creek. As they stood together under the star-filled sky, surrounded by the peaceful territory they had worked so hard to protect and unite, Elena reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had arrived at this fortress as a frightened stranger, compelled by circumstance to marry a masked figure she believed might be a monster. She had discovered instead a man of genuine depth, wisdom, and quiet strength, someone who had gradually revealed not just his true identity as the powerful Alpha King, but his true heart as a partner capable of genuine love and mutual respect. Together, they had faced political intrigue, dangerous investigations, direct confrontation with a determined rival, and the terrifying uncertainty of open conflict, emerging from each challenge with their bond strengthened rather than diminished by the trials they had endured. Elena had transformed from a fearful village girl into a respected and beloved leader, bridging two once wary communities into a unified partnership built on genuine trust and mutual protection. As the night deepened around them and the celebration finally concluded, Elena and Cale made their way back toward their private chambers, their hearts full of gratitude for the unexpected but profound love that had grown from such uncertain and frightening beginnings. Whatever future challenges might yet await their combined territories, Elena knew with complete confidence that she would face them standing beside her true mate, her partner in every sense, ready to protect and nurture the community and the love they had built together against whatever the future might bring. Their story, which had begun with desperate sacrifice and uncertain fear, had ultimately become a testament to the power of genuine courage, patience, and the willingness to look beyond first impressions to discover the true character of those we encounter, even under the most difficult and frightening circumstances. Elena Marsh, once simply the blacksmith's daughter from a small struggling village, had become the beloved Luna of the Northern Territories, her legacy one of unity, courage, and a love story that would be remembered and celebrated by both human and wolf communities for generations to come.